So this is week three's intercession. We're calling these intercessions, where we can take a time to just pause and think about the theme of the week, which this week is about choice. The first week we had presence with Kara. Last week was about presence. Last week was about connection with Dr. Sarah Sandis. And now we have Ethan Schutz from The Human Element, who's also participating in this challenge this month with his life partner, Lauren Gold, who are both amazing people. And they work with an organization called The Human Element. And they pretty much pioneer a lot of really good stuff. And I'll let Ethan, you share a little bit about that. But again, today's conversation is really about thinking about choice as a tool. To kind of really get a sense of, we talk about flow triggers and flow blockers. And I think one of the biggest flow blockers is feeling helpless or hopeless. And did I get frozen?
Oh, sorry. Say it again, please.
I was saying that part of the flow challenge is we talked about triggers and, flow triggers and flow blockers, and how choice can really be a trigger in a way. I mean, it's not listed out there, but I think that idea of autonomy really speaks to the ability to make a choice for yourself. So I would like to kind of frame it. Damon, is there anything else that I'm missing on the frame?
No, that sounds really good. I also just think maybe we can have a conversation a little bit around the different types of choices as well. I think often we think that choice is something that we decide, and there are different ways of even viewing choice. So I'd love to kind of do a little movement around the concept and autonomy for decisions, but also autonomy for other ways that we can show up in the world.
Okay. So no pressure, Ethan.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the work you guys do with The Human Element, because the idea of flow is very human experience, and Human Element for me has been a wonderful experience in terms of giving me skills to kind of build into my practice of being in flow more frequently as well. So just give us a little about who you are and what you do, brother.
Well, thank you. So Scott, Damon, Yosef, everybody, thank you so much. I've been a participant like the rest of you for the last few weeks. Didn't expect to be, pulled up on the stage, and appreciate that. So The Human Element is a body of work. Well, in its simplest form, it's a program that is highly experiential and based on a scientifically validated theory of human interaction. And the purpose of it is to help individuals, teams, and organizations reach their full potential. The way we do that is by, number one, increasing self-awareness of each person individually, and giving them some tools, of which choice is one. And then with all of that information, we then focus on the team level and how we can help teams be most effective by practicing and using the concepts that we provide. So we're also trying to get greater awareness at a team level of how we operate as a team. So it's got those two parts, both the individual part and the team dynamic part. The reason for that is you may have been in this situation where I learned something wonderful for myself, and then I go back home or into my office or my work setting, and the pressure or the atmosphere and the culture of that old familiar setting pushes me right back to where I was in the first place, even though I may have had a wonderful experience. So we're looking at that group dynamic also. And the choice concept is integral to all of this for a couple of reasons that you've mentioned. In its simplest form, the choice concept is a tool for raising my awareness. Here's what I mean by that. We make choices, Damon, to your point, we make lots of different kinds of choices. Broadly speaking, some of those are conscious, and a great deal of them are unconscious. Like everything else, our conscious mind only has a little tiny bit of our experience in it at any given time. There's a huge amount, as you've said, that we're not aware of. But we still are making choices. One way to access what are those choices and how are they working for me is by using what we call the tool of choice, which is to do this, to entertain what seems like an insane idea, but bear with me. If I ask myself, how am I choosing to be in exactly the situation that I'm in? The answer is I go look for the ways in which I help to create it. So if I broaden that out and say, well, let me assume for a moment that I'm choosing my whole life. I'm choosing my circumstances and what I get from life and the actions that I take and the things that I don't do, everything. Let me just entertain that for a moment. Not because we know it's true or not true, or who knows? That's not the purpose. The purpose is to explore, because if I assume for a moment I'm choosing exactly what I've got, then I look for the ways in which I've done that. And what I discover, or what I can discover in that, is the unconscious ways that I have created my own experience. So I'll give you a simple example. Let's say I believe that people don't react well to me when I first meet them. It seems to be true. I meet people and they seem a little standoffish. If I assume for a moment that I've chosen that and that somehow I am participating in making that true, then I go looking for the ways in which I might do that. Maybe I put off some energy or body language that helps to contribute to that. Maybe I only notice the people who act like that and I disregard the other people who don't, for example. So it pushes me to look for that kind of thing. And in doing so, I raise my awareness. So that's the primary primary tool, or what we mean primarily by the basic tool of choice. And there are a lot of implications of all of that, but that's the main.
I think what I've got from that experience of working through this with you is that it's really about learning to own your own shit, basically.
Yeah, that's
it's like the
yeah.
Because I think that's, I remember that one of the exercises we did is, we're on the line of, that you have no choice at all. And 9, you make all the choices, like your disease, what have you. And it was really hard for me because as a cancer survivor, it's like, what do you mean I chose to have cancer? That I played some sort of role in that. And I always, so it wasn't really a matter of, whether it was true or not, but it's just like, wow, it's something to think about. Maybe I made some, maybe I did something with my diet or whatever, but it's like recognizing that when you can't make sense of something, right? When, like, for example, COVID, like there are things that are outside of what I feel in my control, gets me really agitated. That's the part that I wonder how to help people get unstuck, because again, no one can control that. It wasn't our choice to have COVID and take us out. But yet, how do we respond to that? So how do you take on those bigger questions?
Yeah. So, well, let me hit upon a couple of things. First of all, the idea that, well, we didn't choose COVID. Well, maybe not. What if we did? What if we collectively at some, large scale level did that? What might we learn from looking at it from that point of view? Now, I'm not saying that, oh, it's absolutely true. I don't know if it's true. I'm just, that opens up our minds to a different avenue of exploration, which is the entire purpose of choice. So the one about illness comes up a lot. Well, I didn't choose this illness. Why would I do that? And again, the answer is the same. I don't know if we chose it or not. Could be not. And I have nothing to lose by entertaining the idea for a moment that maybe I had something to do with it. Because the very worst that happens is I determine that I didn't. And I'm right back to where I started and I haven't lost anything at all. And I might discover something that's helpful for me in the process. Sometimes it can be easier to see at a smaller scale. Mm-hmm. So, for example, have you ever known somebody who, when the important meeting is coming up, always seems to have a headache or a stomach ache, or there's some physical reason why they can't show up, and they don't? Mm-hmm. Ever known anybody like that? Right. So, there are examples that feel easier to get to. That might lead some credence to it. Or the very notion of placebos. What's with that, right? We have lots of study after study where people who got placebos did the same or better than people who got actual medication. So there's some mechanism going on there that we don't fully understand. And all we're saying is it might be worth exploring it instead of deciding that we don't have choice, which is the same thing as limiting our beliefs for ourselves. And then we get to learn something. And that's the basic idea of that. One way to look at it is, what's the result of whatever happened, whether it's COVID or a plane crash or cancer or anything like that? This is not to blame the victim by any means. This is simply to say, what's the result? And was it something that makes some sense in context and maybe is useful in that way?
Well, that's the fine line, because you were mentioning around like the disease part. I made some choices as a result of having diagnosed. Not that I was making poor choices to begin with, but I refined my choices. So I wasn't going to be held hostage by the diagnosis, but rather take control of how I was going to treat it. You know what I mean? And really be an active participant versus saying, "Oh, my life is." So that part, I think the same thing can be said in any dynamic of really recognizing as what, instead of playing the victim, what can I create with this new reality? And I think that's that shift or pivot that at least I'm gleaning from what you're saying.
Yeah, the way I like to phrase it, it's this helps me get in the driver's seat of my own life.
Right.
You know, or my aunt put it for me really well one time. She said, "I'm trying to be the protagonist in my own life."
Mm.
You know, the hero in my own story.
Right.
And to me, that links to the other part, particularly what you're talking about with flow, in that when I feel like I have taken my own control, gotten my own driver's seat, that feels different. I was actually just on working with a team this afternoon. This came up. And my thought was this: if somebody tells me, this is relevant these days, somebody tells me I have to do something, I have to follow the rules. You can imagine which rules these days, right? I don't like the rules, and I complain about it and say, "You told me to, and you're mean and nasty," or whatever, you know, R-rated words you want to use. I feel like I'm out of control. You're domineering me, right? That's an unpleasant feeling, and it sets up an argument. On the other hand, if I say, "Well, I have a choice at every moment, whether how I want to show up and how I want to participate or not with these rules." If I then choose to say, "You know what, I want to be somebody who follows the rules. It's my choice or not, but I'm clear on that. And so I'm going to choose to follow the rules." Then following the rules can feel perfectly fine to me. Whereas if I feel like I have no choice, following the rules feels awful. The rules haven't changed, and perhaps the other party hasn't changed, but I've changed on the inside. And to me, that's the essence of what choice can do, because it's so empowering from that point of view.
So powerful. And, I really love how you've distilled it down to that. I'm just going to kind of like give you my thoughts as to how I took what you just said, and let me know maybe if we can riff off of that a little. I feel like we all have these old patterns that are kind of beneath the surface, and we can, be manipulated in a sense from that place that we aren't aware of or are not visible of. I know that I've felt that way many times in my life and in many different scenarios. And I also the imagery for me is sort of like us writing our story, and we keep telling ourselves the story. And what we're really doing is corroborating the case for the story. And when we're able to say, what if everything was true, at least what it feels like to me is I was able to, for a minute there, detach from my ego and kind of do a little 360. I did a subject object looking at Damon, as opposed to defending my story behind my own eyes. And from that place, whether, like, as you said, whether it's true or not is irrelevant. What just happened is I was able to activate myself to have fresh solutions, to look for different types of patterns, and to re-engage in my relationship with my surroundings in a way that's maybe a blank slate, as opposed to that vector of the storyline that I just continued to say. How does that sound as a...
Absolutely. What pops to my mind is a phrase we use sometimes: this reorients my search for solutions. And what I would add to what you said is part of the power of it is that it doesn't depend on anybody else. So one of the things I'll say in my programs, I'll ask people, have any of you tried to get other people to change their behavior for you? Like, "Oh, things would be great if only this person would be different." This is what happens at work all the time, right? We try to shape other people's behavior, and we try to do it in a way that they don't even know we're doing it. And then we're frustrated when it doesn't work. Because I think most of us don't want our behavior shaped by somebody else. Thank you very much. Right? Yet we continue to try to do that, and we try to get HR to do it for us, or our manager, and so forth. So that tends to be a failure. More practically, if I change my myself on the inside so that the whole situation feels and looks different to me. Not only do I release myself of being a victim, basically, of somebody else not doing something for me. So I get in the driver's seat. But in the process, I may open up or inspire others actually to begin to change in ways. Maybe, right? Maybe not. But even if they don't, I come at it from such a different place that it all looks different. Just like your example, Damon. It's exactly to that point. So in a way,
go ahead.
right? I mean, instead of trying to get everybody else out there to change, I'm doing something that I have control over, which is me.
Which I think that's, going back to that, what I have control over as it relates to the idea of choice in related to flow is when we talk about autonomy, that's a flow trigger, both in individual and or group flow trigger. And one of the questions that I often ask into groups is like, write down the things where you're most fulfilled in your life, areas in your life where you're most fulfilled, and write in the areas where you feel not fulfilled, you're frustrated, and then gauge on a scale of 0 to 10 how much control you have in those areas. And inevitably, where I'm most fulfilled is where I feel like I have control, and where I'm feeling that I am not fulfilled, or I'm feeling frustrated or anxious around, I don't feel like I have any control. And so it's such an interesting kind of awareness for people to make, to say, wow. And then the question is, okay, what are my choices now that I need to be making in either column, or what choices am I making over here versus over here? And I'd just be, curious to hear from the group, the people that are listening to this. How does that resonate, and what's been said, and how can, what are you guys thinking out there in the flow space? You could raise a hand. This is heavy stuff. I think.
You can make a choice. Just start talking.
Yeah, that's it.
Right.
Who's up?
I'll jump in.
All right.
Rody.
Just what kind of comes to mind is kind of thinking in the work environment where there's a change in policy, there's something different we're going to be doing, and taking that approach with the staff or the employees of trying, as you said, Ethan, kind of reorienting the search for that solution. That if we didn't do it the old way that we did it, we never did it before, and this is the first time you're seeing it, and that's what you're orientating, what you're going to do, the actions you're going to take. And so if you can just reorient your focus onto what we're going to do versus what we've been doing to help shift your resistance to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to me, that fits with the whole notion that we include people in the change so that they're, we say, owning it, right, or being part of creating it. Yeah, it's effectively giving them the choice to do that. Yeah. Yeah, it has a lot of implications like that.
I also like I think another flow trigger that's sort of sneaky powerful is novelty. And I think when you can say, what if, I read a really great article about, I think it was Patagonia, and they did a off-site retreat. They were really diving into all these really heavy problems. And as we were saying here, like not really finding new solutions because they were kind of coming to the situation just the way they were. And I think the coach that was running this was smart enough on day 2 to rip the notes up and say, you know what, go out and go hiking in the snow and just play Imagine If. And don't think about the money, the budget, all the problems, all the things that might make this not happen. Just imagine if the thing that we're talking about, imagine if, right? And they did. They went off on these hikes, and lo and behold, they came up with all these really great fresh ideas. I like that. It feels like a nice sync with this as well, that not just like it's very pragmatic and practical. And then from there, it really seems to unlock, oh, wow, this is new, novelty. And when you sort of take the parameters off trying to corroborate why something is not going to work, a lot of freshness, a lot of new energy. And I feel like that also would be very helpful for one's nervous system.
Yeah, and something you said earlier struck me, where it also is a way to push myself to look at things differently and not simply be shoved by my past, if you will, right? In other words, if I don't consciously look for new ways to do things or check what's really going on and what's really true for me and use choice, then I will almost certainly simply play things out the way that I have before, as influenced by my past and my parents and my upbringing, my culture, and all of those things. It's just like a computer app. You know, it keeps doing the same thing until we get in there and change the code.
As you say that, the terms that came up, am I an architect of my own possibilities, or am I a plumber of dealing with my past crap? You know, it's like, it's like, but I think it's fascinating because, you know, part of this is, you know, our brain either is moving towards reward, right, or away from a threat.
Yeah.
And the choices were are framed by, hey, if I say this thing, I might get rejected, and that's really painful. And I know a part of the work you do with Phyro Theory is kind of talking about the social component, because I guess another question I'd have for people to explore is, again, how many of your choices, going to your comment earlier, Ethan, around, you know, trying to change someone's life, right? But how many of the choices are you making are based upon trying to appease other people's expectations of you, rather than you just being that N=1 that Damon talks about, is just being you. And being congruent, and that's often a rub, because for 50 plus years I played this role, and there's been a gap, and all of a sudden I'm confronted with this change, and all of a sudden I make the choice like, man, I didn't know my life could be like this, you know, because I've lived this different narrative. And so what are some of the frameworks that you help people think through, especially related to that reward versus fear thing? Because I think it's the fear of the consequence of my choice is not the choice. It's what happens if I make the choice.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example, because I think the way I've seen it play out is that the first stage of all of this is to dissolve the blocks that get in the way of me making the positive choices, you know, the flow choices, if you will, that move me toward the things I want, like you say. So this was recent, just working with a group the other day, and one woman was exploring some of her underlying motivations. Excuse me. So one of the areas that we talk about is likability, and we have instruments that measure all of this, and she had a low score on I like people and a low score on people like me. And she looked at them and she said, well, I don't like that, and it doesn't sound right. And we talked about it for a while, and one of the key questions is, well, just for a moment, assume that that is correct and that you are actually choosing to have it exactly that way. This is where really the choice concept really makes a difference. If you assume for a moment that that's exactly right, that you don't like people a whole lot and you don't think they like you very much, what comes out of that? Or in our terms, what's the payoff from that? And she started to realize the payoff for that was that she didn't have to risk that people might not like her. So it's almost a preemptive strike. You know, let me assume that you're not going to like me. And if I do that and you actually don't like me, then I knew it was coming and it won't be so terrible. If you do like me, it's gravy. It's just all extra, and I may not even trust it, but it's extra, and it certainly, you know, it doesn't hurt. And as she went through this process, she started to say, oh, I see. You know, I'd never seen that I was part of this in any way. It just looked like this is how the world treats me. But now I see that I have a part in it. So to me, it was a lovely example of using this concept to discover how am I, like you say, being the architect of my experience. And she could start to cite things that she would do. Oh, yes, you know, I'm standoffish. I'll ask pointed questions when I first meet people, tell them that I'm not a people person. I do all these things, and I don't even notice that I do them. But the result is it says to them, don't like me. And so if they don't, or if they stay away, then I'm safe, right? So there's the avoidance of the fear stuff that you're mentioning. But going through that means that she can now open up to the idea of, maybe I could actually go toward.
Right. Yeah. So speak a little bit more, because you integrate what's called the Phyro Theory into this work. And I think, you know, the work that I've been doing in the flow space is the social dynamic. If you think about the experience in the app, where there's a lot of social connection, we're meeting on the wall, we're giving people high fives. There's a lot of joy, I think, in that experience. And so what I really have appreciated about the Phyro Theory and the work that you guys do in Human Element is really getting people to understand that, to your point around likability, that's an area that's tied to some other choices, either something you want or something you want to avoid. But could you speak a little bit more about where people have choice in the framework that your dad created? Because I think that might be useful if people are feeling stuck.
Do you mean just to outline the framework?
Yeah, a little bit.
So Phyro Theory is really the foundation of this approach called the human element. Phyro is a theory of interpersonal behavior. So it stands for Fundamental Interpersonal Relations Orientation. It's a mouthful, so we just say Phyro. That means we're looking at what are the fundamental ways that we interact with each other. And there are three behaviors around that, which are called inclusion, control, and openness. So inclusion looks at how much do we like to be around each other? How much contact do we want? And we vary. Some of us want to be around people a lot. We like to be social. We like to be in groups. We like to be in meetings. And some people are on the other end and prefer to do things alone or somewhere in the middle. There's not a right or wrong on any of these. It's simply we vary along these scales. So it's a way of understanding our preferences for interacting with each other. The second one is around control. And this is about, do I like to be in charge? Do I like to take the lead? Do I like to give direction? How do I structure the interaction? Or do I prefer to receive control, to have people instruct me or set things up for me or structure things for me? And again, I can vary on that, how much I want, how much other people want. The last one is openness, which is about the depth of the interaction that we have. So if I like a lot of openness, it means I like to share a lot of my own experience. So everything from my thoughts to my feelings to my dilemmas and my intuitions, my reactions, everything. Versus low on openness would mean I like to keep things more private or more to myself. And again, we vary on that. So what the theory does for us is help us understand some of the interactions that we have. So you might have seen, for example, in the workplace, somebody who likes to work with people a lot. So they're always knocking on the doors and hanging out with people and going and chatting and meeting people in the hall and gathering people together and asking for meetings and things like that. And somebody else prefers to work alone, right? They're called the, what do you call it? Solo contributor, right? Subject matter expert. We have these business terms for it, which is sometimes code for the person who likes to sit in their office and do their work by themselves. And that's their preference. And so these two can get in a clash because they have different preferences. And so usually it turns out they're trying to convince each other why the work is important to get done a certain way. But underneath, what they're really arguing about is that they have different ways of going about things. They have different preferences for that. What's underneath that are their own feelings about it, which gets back, Scott, to what you're talking about. That, for example, under the notion of inclusion, it's tied to the feelings around significance that I have. So if I feel that other people are really significant, then I may want to include them a lot, for example. Or I may feel that it's important to do that because significant people should be paid attention to. I might have a whole construct in my head. And as we unpack those beliefs and feelings that people have, then we can get to a deeper place where we understand for ourselves and for each other what's behind the things that we're asking for. And then notice that all of those parts are choices that we make, right? We make the choices to see people a particular way, view them in that way, behave toward them in that way, all for these reasons that we have in our heads.
Which are typically non-conscious, right?
Typically non-conscious, right. And ultimately based on how we feel about ourselves, which is where it all gets back to.
And I think that's the part, because I think the one thing that you have done really for me is, getting out of my head, and getting me to what's the feeling there? And I think that's a big part of this, Damon. I think about flow as this, we're in pursuit of this thing. And it's probably the thing that people are most in pursuit of is to feel my best and so I can be at my best. But it's getting in touch with the feeling behind the choice, of the whys and the why nots. But to Damon's point earlier, some of that stuff can be stuff that I created at a very young age that I have no language for. Because I think about my choices. The work in your space is, I've been unpacking my bags for the last several years, thanks to you, you big jerk. But the work is, realizing that part of the choice is, am I willing to kind of go there, you know, and learn, because it's really been a really fruitful learning process to realize the power of choice, and recognize the other part of it too is that, and it still can be a struggle, and that's okay too, you know, that I don't have to choose to make myself feel guilty when I'm struggling. There's something I need to dig a little deeper around. So it's been really liberating in a lot of ways for me.
That's great. Yeah. And I get to choose how I view that struggle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm not going to put a narrative around it. You know,
Yeah.
I'd rather explore going back to, I want to pivot. Hey, what can I learn from this, rather than, oh my gosh, this is shaping me to be like, you do this to me, or this is what's always happened, I'm a victim again. So,
Yeah.
and in our last little challenge, we talked about the drama triangle, you know, of, you know, victim and, was it victim, critic, and persecutor, right? And then you go from victim to creator, persecutor to challenger, and then critic to
Supportive.
coach. Yeah, coach kind of thing. And so, you know, those roles that we play in our lives, those all become choices too. And I just wonder, again, people who are listening to this, how do you think about the way you see yourself as driven by a set of choices caused by a certain feeling or set of feelings? And again, it's kind of deconstructing so you can reconstruct that person that that's always been there, you know? So that's what I think about the space that we're trying to create over these 30 days, is just, and people have been very transparent about some of these things on the wall, and I've been really inspired by it. So, but I'm just curious to know, Damon, go ahead.
Yeah, I know. It feels full circle back to self-awareness as well. Yeah. That really, when you allow and learn in this case, the Phyro Theory, an ability to kind of turn the camera around a little bit with more of an objective eye, it does feel like then there's more nuance and there's more sort of potential entry points with other people, with yourself. And that feels really powerful. You know, thinking about Rhodey's comment about how he has new policy and they have like this new rule at work. Maybe just some thoughts around that in a loose case study fashion, where I guess off the top of my head, I can think, if there's new policy, well, that triggers a certain dialogue of, I'm not in control of what I'm doing. But then also on a deeper level, like, as you're saying, there are then things within myself, things within you, as we both hear about this new policy that add so much dimensions and dilemma potentially into this equation. And maybe the significant people think this is a great thing, and maybe I want to be one of those significant people, and I sort of am swayed into convincing myself, and maybe on a deeper level, just kind of being drawn into that policy without seeing it clearly, or as I would say, sort of walking down the ladder and really kind of seeing what reality looks like internally, and then also what's really going on with this policy or problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it gives, this whole concept gives me the opportunity to separate those two things. What stuff am I making up about it because I'm fearful that I may lose something? Maybe I'm not significant, right? Or maybe I'm not going to be able to cope with the new setting, or I don't know what's going on, or whatever that happens to be. Versus, let me clear that stuff out so I can see clearly what is actually happening, and how do I want to choose to look at that? Is this the end of the world, or do I want to choose to look at it as an opportunity? And I can do that when I think I can do that once I have at least recognized the fears that get kicked up for me, and then cope with them in some fashion, to your point. Yeah.
Feels like a good time to open it up again and see if people have anything to share right now.
Yeah, I have a thought about our negativity bias. And that's something sometimes as a father, I'm confronted with my 6.5-year-old responding to information immediately, like he relates to it as something is being taken away from him, and then it's being catastrophized, and his direction then and the reaction is to break down. what I've done is I've introduced the ORIT method to him, and now I'm asking him like objectively or relationally and interpretively or directionally. So he knows now on what level he's at, and I'm asking him so because it's hard for me to relate. Like at first I was like a little bit as a douche. I said, "Oh well, that's your choice to react like that." And then my wife told me, like, you can't say that. Like, that doesn't help anything right now because you got to validate his feelings. I said, but it's a choice for him to react like that. And they're like, no, we can't. This is not how it's working. So then I decided I'm going to introduce the ORIT method and figure out where he's at. And he can now tell me he's actually on level number 4. I said, okay, so can we go back to level number 1 and check out what's going on there? So this is the information, okay? Like today is not the day we're making chocolate chip cookies, but that doesn't mean that you won't have chocolate chip cookies ever again. So it's just like, what else can we do then? So if we are not making the cookies as you expected, what else is going to happen? So it's your choice, like on level 1 or 2, kind of how you react to it. And there where I see there's a lot, again, the negativity bias that kicks in 9 out of 10 cases. It's like, it's a threat, it's a fear, it's like, and how do we then use choice to pivot us towards curiosity more or optimism rather than catastrophizing the most negative?
Mm. Yeah, so but my first comment is I wouldn't recommend the notion of choice as something you do to somebody else. Like saying, it's your choice. Sounds like an accusation and usually doesn't function very well. These are supposed to be self-tools primarily. And I mean, I like what you're saying. I would add to it, one other thing that I can do, I think it works very well with children, but with other people too, is explain to them the choices that they have, at least the ones that I see. They may even have more. You know, so you can do this, and this is what may happen, and here you can do this, and here's another option, and even including laying out the choices they have for how they look at it. So I can see this as a terrible thing, or I can see it this way, you know, and then let them pick. And I will often add to that, you know, I'd like to know later how it worked for you. So give them the idea that they can reflect on it too and say, well, did that work for me? Do I want to do something else next time? The other part of that, in terms of getting past the negativity bias, to me, I would tie that back to the fears that we have. Part of the negativity, I think, can be explained by the natural fears that we all carry. So I'll go back to Phyro Theory for a moment. Underneath these ideas of inclusion, control, and openness are some primary fears that are associated with each. And one-to-one, it's inclusion, the fear is being ignored or abandoned. Control, the fear is being humiliated or embarrassed, or feeling like a phony or an imposter. That's the thing we talk about a lot, imposter syndrome. And around openness, the fear is that I'll be disliked or rejected. So our quip is that, well, the nice thing about this theory is I only have 3 things to worry about, which is feeling ignored, humiliated, or rejected. But the serious part of that is that the more I cultivate my capacity to cope with those feelings, the freer I can be and the easier I can get myself out of that place. We assume that I'm going to react that way. Like you say, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to have that negativity, catastrophizing feeling. So if I know, oh, okay, this is probably my feeling about being ignored or feeling like I don't belong or don't matter, whatever version of that I have. If I also have some plan and skills in place to cope with that, to recognize, oh yeah, when that happens, I start getting this feeling in the pit of my stomach, my mind starts racing, whatever that happens to be, I can have a plan for that. Much like any emergency responder has a plan for whatever happens. Same idea. And therefore I can catch it quicker and return myself to baseline faster, which I think in flow terms, help me out here, would mean getting myself back into that happy place, that safe place where I'm feeling in control.
Yeah. So like the struggle might be the feeling of being ignored or rejected or humiliated. And I haven't really come up with some good strategies. I haven't been able, and we always say you name it to tame it. And I think that's the part of, really being able to kind of name what that thing is. And I think for me, it's recognizing that the brain is very social. You know, it's in last week we talked about connection, and I think even Sarah talked about some of this as well. Is just recognizing that a lot of my choices again come back to, can I cope with how other people are going to respond to my choice?
Yeah.
You know, rather than me being clean with my choice and then following it with action and know because it was right for me. As long as it doesn't hurt somebody else or, you know, causes damage. I always say if it's not going to help, if it's going to help and not hurt, then I'm going to put it out there for me and I'm going to give it a go. But if it's going to hurt and not help anybody, which is kind of my constraint about the choices that I make, because I want to be of service and I don't want to be, but again, you would say, well, are you responsible for someone's response kind of thing? So, you know.
In theory, that's what you're for, right?
That sort of leads to a question I'd like to ask of Ethan, if I can, because it's great to have this self-awareness and these skill sets, but as leaders and managers of others and in teams, and we talked about team dynamics before, it's not your subordinates aren't always going to have this knowledge or these skill sets. So their natural tendency is the fight or flight syndrome, particularly in the confrontation perspective. So how do we break through that initial anger and frustration that they may be holding to be able to have this type of conversation with them to set some parameters around choices?
Yeah, it's such an important part. I think it's a combination of my intention and being very open about that. And then in a sense, explaining and educating. Plus there's a huge value in going first, meaning if I'm the boss and there's a situation like you're describing, I think it goes a long way to make the choice to say, I want to tell you my intention in this conversation. I want to explain to you what I'm trying to do. And I'd like to lay out what's happening for me. My experience says that the more I'm actually open about what's really true for me at a deeper level, including the things I'm not sure about or don't feel good about, the more effective I can be, even if the other party chooses not to participate in the conversation, which they may not. They may be too frightened or, you know, feel like, what's this? This guy's really weird. Or, okay, you know, there's something to be said for time and letting it seep in and letting them build up trust over time that they're not going to get clobbered. But that can be really helpful.
Yeah, cool. Take away the fear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think by illustrating or modeling that, that's part of how we can get there.
It's a really powerful sentence. A huge value in going first.
Yeah, I like it.
That's powerful. I like that too. And the way you just described that, Ethan, felt disarming. It felt like I'm not going to blindside you. I'm going to expose myself and explain what it is that I'm going to do. And to Yosef's point with his son, you know, kind of explaining and offering some possibilities seems like a really good way to give them some semblance of control and autonomy, and yet a little bit of guidance with defining the playground in a sense. That feels really impactful. When you say primal fear underneath these three, I'm assuming that's coming from sort of a deeper level of science and sort of human behavior. Can you explain a little bit more about those fears and why we all have them?
Well, it's this is all related to Phyro Theory as well, where we talk about I stated it wrong before. We talk about the primary fear is a fear that I can't cope.
Primary. Okay, got it. Sorry, I think I misunderstood that. Yeah.
I think I said the wrong word. So then the secondary fears are specifically around it being ignored, humiliated, and rejected. But with each of those, what we're saying is I'm afraid that I don't know how to cope with those. So if I learn how to cope with being ignored, then it's not so terrible anymore. It extends to how I deal with other people. So if I'm afraid the boss is going to be angry at me, then what we normally say is, well, I don't know how to cope with the boss or deal with the boss. what we're really saying at a deeper level is, I don't know how to cope with the boss being angry at me. If I learn how to cope with somebody being angry at me, then it's not so terrible. Then my boss becomes much less frightening, even though the boss didn't change at all. So in a sense, that's the essence of what we're using this concept to help people get to. And I keep feeling like as I go through the challenge these past weeks, it all connects so perfectly to that notion that I'm doing everything I can to get into that state where I almost lose track of myself because I'm just feeling it, right?
Beautiful.
Stand
Beautiful.
flow. Yeah, I understood flow as like a musician. You know, there's a point where we get to where it's just happening.
which feels so good, and it's not necessarily a place that we can be in very often. But I think that the quest and the understanding of the cycle of all of that is also really powerful when we see that, hey, there are times when we'll be in struggle. There are times when we need to just pull away from this and release. And then when we're in flow, you know, obviously the best thing to do is don't talk about it. Just be in it, you know. And then you have to recover. And so there's like this idea of a wheel. The other thing that popped out at me that you said that I really see a lot with people is around this concept of responding, these emergency responders. And, you know, I mean, the way I frame it in my mind is thinking about it like mistake routines or a pre-mortems, you know, things that, you know, potentially could go wrong.
Right.
And I find that when I have an idea of what I might do if that happens, let's just say it's the worst thing. And I'm like, well, if it happens, you know, I'm going to take 10 breaths and I'm going to walk around the room, or I'm going to exit the building and I'm going to smile or whatever it is. When I know beforehand that even if the worst thing happens, I have a couple steps.
Right.
I think that's a really powerful and liberating place to be. And I actually think it, at least for me personally, it allows me to push even farther and maybe even stretch myself a little bit more, which are also flow triggers. And with the knowledge that I'm not going to land on my face without any knowledge of what to do.
Yeah, exactly. And then we're right back at what Scott was saying, that when I feel like I have some control over what's going on, my stress level goes down. I enjoy it better. Yeah. I wanted to make one other point that we're implying, but I wanted to be specific about it, which is I think many of us make a lot of choices to manage our image as seen by others, right? As if a colleague of ours put it this way, said, I don't want to go around living my life as if my ego is on trial all the time, which I love. And I can relate to it a lot. Like, am I choosing to do what I'm doing because I think you will then see me a particular way that I want to be seen? As opposed to, I'm doing this because I like the way it feels to me, and you will react to me as you react to me. Because part of the point of that is, if I'm trying to get everybody to see me a particular way, I will almost certainly fail. There are way too many people that I could possibly manage to, you know, get you all to see me exactly the way I want to be seen. What a futile endeavor, you know.
Totally.
I drop that, a world of possibilities opens up that's much more attainable and freeing.
Yeah, I definitely can feel that one. You know, the internal locus of control being that what the world happens and then I respond is very liberating and calming, as opposed to the external locus of control, which is, I hope the world gives me what it is that I'm asking for, but I'm not even sure what I'm asking for.
Yeah.
You know, like, hey, again, it's I want to be mindful of time and also our audience, and I feel like this would be a really good time for somebody to kind of maybe invite us into your world and maybe share a place that maybe you're slightly challenged by, or just how this conversation moves you. So feel free to chime in here. Love to hear from the community for sure.
Ethan, just
Nobody
wanted
else. Go ahead, Rody.
no, that's right. Go ahead, Joseph. After you.
Okay. Well, I have thought, and that might be a little bit of a paradox here because it's about choice and acceptance. And it makes me think about it because I heard a medical doctor recently give a talk, and he worked in hospice and he worked also in the emergency room. So he brought people back who had already crossed over. And he said the recurring theme had been that the people who he brought back to life again, they said, "Why did you bring me back?" And also the background, what they said, that was a feeling of total acceptance that they felt on the other side. So ultimately, we will return to a feeling of total acceptance. Now, accepting certain circumstances may contradict a little bit that there is actually a choice, but it's a choice to accept. So I just wanted to let you kind of find the correlation there between acceptance or surrender and choice.
Yeah, from this viewpoint, it's exactly what you say. I can make the choice to accept. I can make the choice not to choose. So my practical example is this: when I travel, I like to choose to get lost and just explore, the city I'm in or whatever, and effectively not make the choice. So we assume under this principle that I always have that option too, of saying I choose not to, and allowing things to unfold or allowing other actors to direct things. It feels very different to decide to do that than to feel like I don't have any option. And again, that's the main point for us, the larger metaphysical question. I don't know. Interesting to explore. Yeah.
Rody, jump on in there.
Yeah, Ethan, I just wanted to get back to the aspect you were talking about as far as being genuine and showing up in a group, being genuine, and kind of looking at the group itself, the cohesiveness, and as far as the more that are making that choice to show up genuine, what do you see as far as the level increase, as far as the flow of the group? Is that really an important factor? The more being genuine in a group environment, discussing, working on, and just being more cohesive.
By being authentic.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, my bias is yes, definitely. I think the authenticity and the openness is what is the lubricant of the group, if you will. That things will flow not only internally, but between people, and thus the group as a whole is more likely to get into that flow state than if we're essentially blocking things by saying no or by lying in some fashion or obfuscating. Some of the work that Scott and I are doing is around a body of work called Radical Collaboration, which is related to the human element. And one of the ideas there is that we have different mindsets or zones that we're in. So the flow or positive collaborative mindset is called the green zone. Red zone would be combative, confrontive, combative. And then there's a pink zone, which is where everything looks nice on the surface, but underneath we're not really being straight with each other. So the frustrations and the disappointments are all just going underground. And I think of that when you're describing it, that if we're not fully authentic, it might look okay on the surface, but things don't quite happen, or everything slows down a little bit, or as soon as the meeting's over, everybody disperses and they don't really associate with each other any other way. And I think the way back from that is the authenticity, even when it's a tough message. If I say, well, I'm frustrated with somebody else, if we're really open about it and can listen to each other, I find that authenticity actually brings us closer, even if we've disagreed or had a difficult experience with one another. And then we're more likely to get back into that flow state. At least that'd be my personal viewpoint on it. Yeah. I'm curious, does that match yours, or do you have a different view?
No, it's the same. I'm kind of also the follow up to that is kind of what are kind of in a group environment some flow triggers to get people to show up more authentic.
What do I think about that? mean, my first impulse is that they're going to be very similar to what we're talking about as at the individual level, certainly. I also think in a group, we have the chance to inspire each other, partly with what we were talking about before, where if I choose to go first and model something, try something out 4% more, that's likely to inspire other people. I think there's a great power in that. I also think choice happens at the group level. How are we choosing to be as a group? Who do we want to be as that group? And we get a chance to create our own reality that way. I liken it to the feeling that I had as a kid when, I was playing with my friends. I remember playing tag in 3rd grade and just having a blast because everybody was just in it together, right? And I always ask, well, what if we could make it feel that way at work? Was that level of excitement and aliveness and fun? To me, that's group flow, or what we're calling conscious co-creation. We're just doing it together. We're not even thinking about it. So there's that flow piece. We're so in tune with each other at that moment. As somebody put in the chat, it's the yes and, right, from improv. We go with it. And to me that, once we get that positive dynamic, then of course that feeds on itself in the group, it reinforces.
Ethan, thank you. You bring up some really good points. And, as I'm thinking about it, as I'm listening, I'm thinking about just from a developmental perspective, just when I think about human beings, right? And I think about attachment, and I think about trust and connection, and how we build relationships. And, as we're talking about choice, there's a couple variables, that we have to think about, right? Because, there is that experience level, and this kind of goes with kind of what Joseph was sharing. As children, they don't have the same capacity as we do as adults, right? Their brains aren't where they are, where we are. And so we're really having to lend our brains or our prefrontal cortex to them to help them have an experience and then navigate through that experience in a way that's efficacious, and for them to ultimately make a decision about how they want to show up and how they want to use that, right? And so a lot of times, when I'm having conversations with groups of individuals, I might ask them the question, where do those values and beliefs come from? Right? Because many times than not, there is a mismatch about how they see themselves but how they were taught, right? And so because of that cognitive dissonance, if you will, they're not really sure who they are in the first place. And then there's an expectation or almost an assumption that's kind of made because all of us are in the same space and all of us are in the same professional level or experience, that we've all had the same experience, right? And that we're all at the same level when it comes to being able to decide when these choice points are presented to us, or being able to decide that everyone else is where we are developmentally. And that assumption typically is false, right? And so there's those things we have to take in consideration, because we can see choice, but I can speak for myself. There's been a lot of work that's been done over many decades, right? That got me to the point where I am here, and I'm still learning and growing in all of my experiences, right? And so even where I am, I would always say, I don't have it all under control. So there's a sense of being able to be vulnerable, right? That sense of vulnerability, having the courage to be vulnerable and actually share that with someone, to even be able to have a conversation where they can feel like they can trust you enough to actually engage in the conversation, right? So when we apply it to kids, it's one thing we understand developmentally, but when we look at adults, I think we need to be careful not to make an assumption that everybody's in the same space, because probably are not in that same place, even be able to be on the same level where you are cognitively. I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, I totally agree. The whole notion of meeting people where they are, I think, is hugely crucial. And then taking them, one little step and letting them decide if they want to go there or not is a crucial way to work with people. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I would add to that too, is that we have to be careful not to believe and let our ego get in the way of believing that we've graduated,
Yes.
And now we're pulling everybody else up, right? Because this is a journey. This is not the destination. It's a journey, right? So, but I think it's interesting to be having the conversation and dancing around these points. It's
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah,
I
Paul,
think
I was going to say, Paul, you bring up a good point for me. When you said that, it's one thing that comes up for me that I realize that the more awareness I create, going back to that self-awareness, it feels like I have more options in my life, right? So by growing my own awareness, I have more options. And, again, I'm seeing that on the wall of wins where people have an awareness and now they have different options that they didn't have before just because they developed their own awareness. It's nothing that Damon and I did or anyone else did. It's just, they're willing to go in and maybe look in the dark place and find some light and they're like, I didn't realize it. Now I have some choice. And that to me is really empowering. And to your point, I mean, both Damon and I, we don't pretend to be, experts in anything other than we are practicers of this thing called flow, and we want to share it to as many people, So I hope I'm not speaking for you, Damon, and maybe, but my father-in-law says I was a cesspool of knowledge. So I'm still trying to figure out how to make choices with that one, but
yeah, don't use the E word on me. That's for sure.
Yeah. Really no experts here.
And as a result, I have permission to do whatever the hell I want because I'm not pigeonholed, right? So that's the beauty. It gives me more choices. So, but anyway, as you were talking, Paul, I think hopefully as we go through this and as I go through this journey, I found that as I just develop more awareness around my pain points and the areas of struggle, I do find more opportunities, and that 4% I can step into more, I guess, gracefully. So it's a great point.
Yeah.
The parable that the video this week is David Foster Wallace, and the parable he speaks of at the beginning about the two fish swimming along, and the older fish coming by says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the two fish say, "Well, what's water?" And he shoots them all the way up to the surface. They break through, and he points down, "That's water." And it does feel like this work is so all-pervasive. It's so embedded and ingrained in us that, to your point, Paul, we assume that everybody is a certain way, that we look at the world, we solve problems, and so Ethan, I just love your work and how you've really shined a light on these natural and sort of organic and complex differentiations of where we are, and really shining a light on the fact that we're all swimming in water and we don't really realize it. And to me, that's the beautiful thing, and it's what makes it so fascinating, and it's what makes humans so fascinating. And I think that part of it also is sort of byproduct, this autotelic, you start to do it because it feels good, as opposed to trying to get somewhere or, achieve the bright, shiny object. And to me, when that starts to happen organizationally, individually, within the family, some really beautiful human truths seem to come out and make the game a lot more fun,
Yeah.
So I'd like to just sort of invite anyone else if they want to throw something in. Anyone have a mic drop for us? Besides Ethan? We know Ethan's got one.
Choose somebody.
Well, I'd like to give it to Ethan then, because I've learned a lot, Ethan. Thank you so much for coming on. It's super fascinating work and so important. And I'll be thinking about this conversation tonight and probably in the morning as well. So thanks so much. And anything you want to take us home with, I'd appreciate it.
Well, thank you. It's fun. It's one of my favorite subjects. I find that in our network of people who do this work, choice is probably the thing that recurs the most, that people chew on and chew on and chew on. And Paul, to your point, it's the journey, it's the condition, it's the human condition to be chewing on it. I figure when I'm done chewing on it, I'm done. I had one other thought, which is, Paul, I think everything you're saying for me comes back to this notion that this is a tool for myself, not to do to other people. More and more, I'm convinced that other people will do something different if they opt in, but that's their choice. They get to opt in or not. And anytime this is one thing I always look for in myself. Do I have an agenda for the other person? Because as soon as I do, I get myself at odds with them. So that's a piece of awareness I always want to be watching myself for. I can feel it, you know, as soon as I want you to get here. Don't you see? You should just get, boy, do I get myself in trouble in a hurry. Not a choice I want to make. Yeah. Thank you.
Huge value in going first. I loved that. That's a really beautiful way to frame it. That's what I'll walk away with. Scott, any final words from you?
Just great stuff. I can go on these mind walks forever, and especially with this community, I just love it. It's a good mind walk and a good soul with some good souls. So it's invigorating. So I appreciate it, Ethan. Thanks for playing. Thanks everyone for playing. So we have it recorded. I'm going to hit stop recording. Usually I know people spend a little time after hours. I think when we stop recording, people start yapping. So I'm going to stop record, but thanks everybody. And let's keep it up in the challenge. So we'll see you.
Thank you, Ethan.